Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and tonight I invite you to another exciting episode of Witchcraft and Theurgy, hosted by the one, the only, the legendary muse, Brandy Williams. Greetings, Brandy. How are you?
I'm great, Hercules. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to this show.
Me too. And I'm very excited to have Frater Barrabbas with us. Frater Barrabbas is an Alexandrian witch and also a theurgist. I know him from our work in the ceremonial community. I notice also that you're the founder of a magical order called the Order of the Gnostic Star. So do you want to say just another word or two about your practice, and then I can go launch into the questions?
Sure. Well, let's see now. A long, long time ago, in um, a galaxy far away, I was initiated into the Alexander tradition on my just after my 21st birthday. So that was 1976, and I was in a coven that I thought was, like Camelot, but it actually became the coven from hell because the individual who was running it, his name was, he called himself Christopher Sin, but his real name was Bill Schnabelin.
Hmm.
And he's written a number of really nasty books out of Chick publications,
Oh,
one of which was called Wicca, Satan's Little White Lie. And so, that's some of the skeletons in the closet. As far as the ESSG is concerned, the Egregora Sancta Stella Gnostica, which is so much of well, it's hard to remember for a lot of folks, so they just call it the Order of the Gnostic Star. And basically, there was a group of magicians uh, who were kind of engaged with witchcraft and with the Golden Dawn in Kansas City
hmm.
back in, oh gosh, it must have been 85, 86. And they basically came to me and asked me to help them found a magical order. And so I did that. And I had an enormous amount of rituals and ritual lore and all of that stuff, which they knew about. But I had to translate it out of my personal magical system, which was idiosyncratic to me, into a structure, a set of themes that they believed were represented what they want to do. So we went from the Grail mythos with Arthur and Merlin, and then from there we went to the Egyptian mythos, and then we went into almost kind of I would say, a real Gnostic sort of perspective, with, all of the Sethians of the Gnostic, um, quasi-Gnostic tradition of, the first to third century of the CE. So, it was quite a journey. Most of those folks have kind of gone off to do other things. Only one person is still working with us, and his name is Frater Anubis, and he lives in Tallahassee. And they had just had a mini con there called Swamp Mystics, which Brandy, I think that if you ever want to go to Florida to Tallahassee, which is Spanish Moss and haunted, they've got a beautiful location there to have their gatherings, and I believe that it was so successful this time that they'll probably have another one. So, at any rate, in a long story short, so what I'm doing right now is, now that I've written my Four Witches series, which is 5 books, and then an intro book, which I didn't want to write, but I sort of wrote anyways. You know how that is. I don't want to
I do.
write it. I don't want to write a book on that's an introduction book, but I ended up doing it anyways. And also my relationship with Llewellyn came to an end. I've been with them for 10 years, and that's a pretty good run for a publisher. And the book that you are interested in, which is Sacramental Theurgy for Witches, that one right there, nice green cover. Llewellyn broke the contract with me and rejected it, saying that they felt it was not marketable. And so far, according to what my publisher has been telling me, that they couldn't have been more wrong. And so, you know, now that those 5 books are done, 6 if you count the intro book, now I'm basically taking the materials that I have um, pulled together and assembled and worked on for the last 35 years of my life, starting back in the early 90s and all the way up to, 2017. I'm basically taking all of that material and I'm distilling it and packaging it into books because now I know how to do that. Whereas before, I didn't know how to do that. If you look at me in the 90s, I was a terrible writer, awful. Even in the early 2000s, I wasn't particularly that good. But anyway, so that's where I've been, and so this is where I am today. So right now, what I'm doing is I'm trying to take all of the practical rituals and experiences and ordeals that I've gone through, and I'm basically putting them into books so that other people can get that material and go with it and work with it. Because my long relationship with the goddess basically stipulated that I needed to do this. I needed to make this material available to the public because it wasn't just my material. It was to be given out. And so that's more or less what I'm doing. So here we are.
Yay. Oh, that's wonderful. And to sort of background you on Hercules and me, we work with a group of people, of theurgists who are writers, and Hercules is kind enough to host us. Every month we meet in a discussion called Living Theurgy. And so we were actually doing a book. We were doing an anthology together, and we were looking for people to talk about theurgy. And I said, well, why don't we ask witches? And someone said, well, witches don't do theurgy. And I said, but we do. So I started a whole series of interviews, Witchcraft and Theurgy. And when I saw that you had written Sacramental Theurgy for Witches, I said, this is perfect. I have to talk to you about this. So I want to get into the book and into the questions about it. And then at sort of toward the end, I want to give you a chance to talk about your upcoming book. And then you have a long list of books coming out with Crossed Crow. So we can mention those coming through. So we'll start with, I always start with two questions, and I think I warned you about this. How do you understand witchcraft and how do you understand theurgy? So I'll start with witchcraft. How do you understand witchcraft? What is your definition of witchcraft?
Witchcraft is basically a twofold process in my book. Now, I got to understand, I was initiated in the Alexandrian tradition back in 1976. That's when it was still popular to believe that witchcraft was the old religion, and that's the way it was packaged and sold, even though that really was a myth and was not exact. But at any rate, so witchcraft is a religion and it's a system of magic. I do not believe, after doing a lot of research, that witchcraft really was much of a religion in the past, and even going back to antiquity. It seems to have been more of a series of techniques. And if you were really powerful as a witch back in antiquity, then you would have had the sponsorship and the alignment to a deity. Generally, someone like Hecate, or or one of the chthonic aspects of the deities, or something like that. So that's what you would connect to. But still, what you practiced was a series of rituals, one of which was to gain, connection with a what I would call a familiar spirit, or there are other names for it. We'll get into that later. But so that's kind of, witchcraft from antiquity, and witchcraft today has brought into it, the religion. And which is a curious thing because, this is something new. This is something very modern associated with witchcraft. It really wasn't a religion. When I was involved in witchcraft, you not only had to learn how to celebrate the Sabbats and work with the phases of the moon and attune yourself to nature and to kind of open yourself up to that as a process. There wasn't any sacred writings or anything like that. What was out there was nature and life to experience. And so that was pretty much, what we had for sacred, writings. What we did have, though, was a book of shadows that contained a number of rituals that allowed us to do initiations. It allowed us to do, to celebrate the quarter and cross quarter points in the solar cycle of the seasons. And it allows us also to, to perform what would be called an esbat, or a lunar adoration of the deity, of the goddess, and to experience the ability to draw down that deity into the personification of a individual who specialized in that ability within the group or the coven. So, in many, and of course, that process of doing the draw included with it a communion ceremony associated with that deity. And so those were considered the core rituals for witchcraft as I was trained in it back in the 70s. And it's something that I've continued to work with today. So when we talk about, witchcraft, and we talk about witchcraft and theurgy, theurgy is baked into witchcraft, mainly because of the primary sacramental flow out of witchcraft is Godhead personification on one hand, and on the other hand, the generation of sacraments through, the blessing and intercession of that deity being personified. And of course, that blessing and the sacraments that come from it, whether it's beer and bread or wine and cakes or whatever those things are imbued through a process similar to Catholic transubstantiation into being, things associated with the deity, so that when you take these sacraments into your body, you are essentially becoming one physically with that aspect of the deity that's been generated, in your coven esbat ceremony. So it only takes a little step from there to actually see that, okay, anything that the deity blesses is made sacred, right? You don't need to just immediately consume them. You can use them as magical tools, even as relics. That creates a really powerful kind of religious magic, and I believe that it's fundamental to witchcraft. Now, there are witches who believe that, witchcraft is not magical, that we should basically put aside the magic because that's kind of, I don't know, it makes us look curious to other, established religions, and there's a real desire to, to be validated by the opinions of people who are not involved in our religion, which is sort of absurd. But but as far as I'm concerned, these two things go together, and they come together in that sacramental, magical ceremony of the drawing down, whether it's the moon or the sun, where a person personifies the deity, and then they bless things, give healings, give oracle type advice, and all of that coming through the deity in an intimate fashion with the other people who are part of that coven. Because that's such an emphasis with the kinds of magic and the kinds of things that I learned, starting out as a witch, and that I've continued to look at that all the way through all of these various processes, theurgy has always been an aspect of what I do. One other thing that I'd like to mention is that whenever I work magic, I do a minor godhead assumption. I perform magic. I'm not performing it as Brian or Frater Barrabbas or I'm performing it as an aspect of the deity whose actual name I will not reveal, because it's my personal stuff. But I'm functioning as a deity in that kind of magical environment. If I have a script that I'm following, and all of a sudden I get a wild hair and say, no, I'm going to do this because the Godhead is in me while I'm practicing this magic. That change is okay. If I was purely a ceremonialist, steeped in the Solomonic system of magic and all that, such a change would not be allowed. If you made a mistake in a ritual, the really strict ceremonialists require that you start over again. But because the deity is in me and I'm working magic, that allows me to be able to do all sorts of things and basically be able to do it in a creative and interactive sort of way, that might not be the case with more stricter ceremonial perspectives. Also, here's another point too. There's been some discussion about will-based magic. And a good friend of mine, Taylor Elwood, basically, after going through some personal difficulties, came to the conclusion that will-based magic by itself just didn't cut it. And so you have Thelemites out there, people who are, reading and studying Crowley and following what he's doing. But the thing is that by yourself alone, without the sponsorship of a deity, without the deity inhabiting you as you work magic, will-based magic is probably has as much of a possibility of failing as it does succeeding. And in addition to that, there's no lessons learned because there's no higher force that you can go to meditate and commune with and get some kind of instruction as to why it failed.
And that's that's lovely. And your definition of witchcraft pretty much talked about all of the things that you talk about in your book. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really very comprehensive. And I think one of the sort of definitions that people are using for theurgy, our group talks about Neoplatonic theurgy and the ancient theurgy and how it's being brought into the contemporary world. And there are a lot of people writing in that now. But I want to pick up, that sort of isn't where you went, and I want to pick up on what you talked about, sacramental theurgy and transformational. So let me just quote you, and then we can go there. You say that witchcraft theurgy can be divided into two categories: sacramental magic and the mysteries of transformation. And then you define sacramental magic, I have footnote 2, as anything, a sacrament is anything that is offered to a deity where it is blessed, charged with the essence of that deity, and then returned for use by the individual worshiper. So that's sacramental theurgy, and you did a really good job of describing that. And then you also talked to the process of drawing down the moon, or I call it carrying deity, and the process of bringing the deity into yourself or into another person. And is that what you mean by transformational theurgy? Is that what is that how you define transformational theurgy?
Well, basically what you're describing is the sacramental process, which is really the core of all of this. And the sacramental process means that deity is intimate. It is available to us. There isn't any barrier out there, or, thou shalt not, or you've been kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So, only if God feels sorry for you is he going to have anything to do to change, your tragic circumstances of being mortal and having to till the earth and all the other unpleasantness associated with terrestrial existence. From my perspective, the gateway to the deities are available to us. And I refer to it as Godhead assumption. That's how I call it. Witches have called it the draw. I can't remember the term how was it?
It's drawing down the moon, drawing down the sun, and I'm a Georgian. Well, I'll talk to you later about that. I'm in your exact. I was initiated in 77, and it's interesting. The Georgian book calls it calling down, but that's sort of the language in the traditional books.
Yeah, the tradition that Starhawk was a part of has a different name for it. That's also kind of interesting, and for the life of me, I can't remember.
Some people call it channeling. Some people call it aspecting.
Yeah, that's it. Aspecting is what they call it.
Yeah.
But basically, what we're saying is that it is a conscious perspective that says that deity is available to us. There's no barrier except the barriers that we place there. And if we go into a magic circle, and in witchcraft, a magic circle is a boundary Similar to if you had an ancient temple, you know, in antiquity, there would be a boundary associated with that temple. Once you cross that boundary, you would be in that sacred precinct. A witch's circle is the same thing. It is a boundary between the profane world, the material profane world that does not believe. And within that circle, you are basically, you know, in the domain of the gods and the dread lords and all the deities, spirits, angels, demons, everything. You're in this in-between world. So a lot of these concepts that are just, I would say, the simplest elements to what I would call a form of practical witchcraft, these are all elements of theurgy. They, of course, if we were not speaking, you know, Koine Greek, but I'm sure that if somebody wrote all this stuff down in Koine Greek and went back in time, a lot of the Neoplatonists would recognize it. The other thing about the Neoplatonists that we forget is that the system of philosophy that was followed back in those days, and you know this probably better than a lot of us who occultists, they were literally initiated into it. They had a whole regimen of disciplines and practices that were a part of what it is that they did. Not only they didn't just sit around and have symposiums and drink wine and talk about, you know, what Socrates said.
Although they did do that.
They did do that. However, being a philosopher meant that you had to be, you know, upper class, number one, in order to be able to afford the time that was necessary in order for you to be able to study this. But that whole discipline, you know, was basically driven underground by Christianity, and then it resurfaced in Turkey. Was it Haran? Haran? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then from there, you know, the Sultanate built up Baghdad, and so all of these occultists and metaphysicians from all over the world, you know, from China, from India, they were all in Baghdad, and that's where the academy ended up as well. But as far as the West is concerned, we've lost that. We've lost an enormous amount of practices and all that because they were not things that were written down. So, you know, but yeah, I mean, I think that because of the core practices of witchcraft, it is a system of theurgy, because the pagans of antiquity, and actually I should say polytheists, because pagane means, you know, bumpkin, basically. In the Latin tongue, it means, you know, bumpkin. It means that you're unsophisticated, that you're a simpleton. But the polytheists understood that there could be some that the deities are there, that they are accessible, that if you turn around in the right place at the right time in the right state of mind, behold the deities before you. And most of, I would say, because of Christianity, we've kind of lost that. I mean, you can go into a church and get, you know, a buzz and all that, but you know, our science and our monotheism has really taken us away from that. So I believe that witchcraft as a form of theurgy brings that concept that was forgotten and lost in antiquity back into the present time. And so that's why I think that witchcraft is really, really important.
Yeah, I think that witchcraft is where we are regaining the ability to do those practices. And one of the things that my work has kind of pointed me to is the essential the continuum of Western practice. There's not so much a division between witchcraft and ceremonial magic. Witchcraft grew out of the Western magical tradition, and witches are starting to recognize that. Jason Mankey, I asked him how he defined witchcraft, and he said witchcraft is the flowering of the Western magical tradition. And so witches, you know, educated witches are going to the ceremonial texts and looking at them and saying, okay, well, you know, what went into our work and what do we need to build out? And one of those things is exactly that, the drawing drawing down the transformational aspect. And so witches are starting to write that. Jason Mankey wrote Transformational Witchcraft, and he talked about drawing down. And the Farrers, Janet Farrer and Gavin Bone, sorry, they were triad. Did you know that?
Yes, I do. I met all three of them.
Did you really? Oh, I mean, I'd met them separately, but I just saw it went by. They were a triad. Oh, cool. I'm a triad too. So Janet Farrer and Gavin Bone have written a whole book about assuming Godhead. And I think this is another reason that this is an essential book, everyone. You got to read this. I think this is really exciting because you also talk about steps of theurgy, how it manifests, and then how you see the deity, the phases that it goes through. I just wrote a piece for an anthology that we're writing for Llewellyn called Carrying Deity in Modern Magical Practice, and I was looking for, I wish I had your book then, because I was looking for definitions, and we really don't have any. And you're helping to build that out. So the Golden Dawn had this idea with the drawing down. They called it Assumption of God form. It was an on-off switch. You had the deity, or you didn't have the deity. And as you said, you didn't talk. You then went and did a ritual. In the OTO, there's actually EGC. There's a ritual that Aleister Crowley wrote, Liber 15, the Gnostic Mass, where again the priestess has deity, but it's an on-off switch. And then once she has the deity, she just stands there and is inspiring while the priest gets to do all kinds of things, you know.
I
think it's wonderful for you to line out, like, here's how you get here's how you do the invocation, here's what you experience during the invocation, and here are the stages. So I'd love you to talk about that some more.
Well, one thing is that I do want to talk to you a little bit about the Gnostic Mass versus the Mass of the Goddess, which I put into that book, and how distinctly different it is. But you know, basically I have another book called Transformative Initiation for Witches, and that's the fifth and final book in that series. And that book basically goes into the whole transformation aspect of it, but I do cover it in Sacramental Theurgy. Basically, the transition that we go through it's really already there. It's part of the process of us being born, living, maturing, becoming, going from childhood to adulthood, becoming parents, if that's our path, or, whatever. And eventually, aging, retiring, and then dying. I mean, you can break that into basically 4 stages. But those 4 stages are really the cosmic gonic cycle, something that Empedocles really emphasized with the 4 elements as representing a cosmic gonic cycle. And of course, the 5th attribute of that is the attribute that is hidden, that is always there, the one that
Yes.
has no name. But anyway, so, day and night, the lunar cycle, the solar cycle, the cycle of vegetation, things in the spring, things begin to grow and all that, and then they wax, and then in the autumn they die, and then they go dormant. And that reflects on us as well. But here's the thing, the 5th mystery in that is the mystery of deity itself. And if we have the capacity of manifesting and channeling deity into our life, that transformation is so powerful that it will initiate us and ultimately enlighten us. If you have the deity drawn down, I'm not talking about, just a simple, in place sort of process. I'm talking about the actual personification, where you take 3 months of your life and you rigorously work it. Kind of like what Crowley was talking about when he was referring to, how you courted and loved and was devoted to a deity to the point where you gained unity with that entity. Was it Liber Barrabbas?
Yeah, Liber Astarte.
Astarte.
Really, yeah. Yeah.
I never remember the names. And
Yeah.
there are people who just rattle this stuff off, and I'm like, oh, yeah.
It's because I live this stuff. I can't tell you much about but Liber Astarte, I've drilled down. I've done classes on it. So yeah,
Yeah, not
it's
only,
really good in terms of like, here's how you do theurgy. Very dense though.
well, yes, and he wrote it in such a fashion that it's not easy to comprehend. And but you know, your writing on this, I actually found on the internet as I was pulling this together. Um, uh, there, I think I can't
Liber
remember.
Astarte, I'm sure.
Yeah, you were basically commenting on you know, Liber Astarte. Um, but yeah, the other thing is that but you see, that is the central mystery. And I believe that every one of us who's on the path should go through that process at least once, where you take out 3 months of your life, and you could still go to work and still do all the things that you know that you have to do, but you focus on a specific deity and you approach that deity as a lover, and you go through the process of assimilating and being assimilated by that deity. Because and you can see in a monotheistic tradition that is against the law. I mean, that whether it's Mosaic law, whether it's, you know, theology of Catholicism, or you know, John Calvin, or in any of these individuals, it's something that is forbidden. However, in some other traditions, like you know, Voodoo or Santeria, or even, you know, how a temple religious practice in India is performed, it is possible for a person to be obsessed and assimilated by a deity. And that's what we call henotheism. And so everyone who's on this path needs a good, strong dosage of henotheism. Now, that whole section where I talk about this process, I know some individuals who have devoted their entire life to serving a specific deity. I have a friend of mine, and you may know him, whose name's Steve Posh, who lives in Minneapolis. He's a writer. You can find his writings out there. He's an amazing poet. He's also a Jewish and is proud of it. Um, but he has devoted his whole life to serving the deity, and people have basically given him a place to live, beautiful house. He's but you know, he lives as a vegetarian, hand to mouth, and based upon the generosity of others. But he's kind of like a spiritual leader for that whole area, um, because every few years he goes out and conducts, you know, a grand Sabbath where he personifies a deity. And I can tell you for a fact that Steve is gone. When that God shows up, Steve is not there anymore. He's gone, and in place of him is Hern, the horn god.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing. Yes, I just started working with her and Aylin of the Ways. I will go look Steve up again for sure. He's a wonderful man, and I'm glad you're referring people to him.
There are others who are doing it, but if you continually have these kinds of encounters, they're going to change you, and they're going to trigger a transformation in you. And the transformation that we all know, I would say intimately, is of course the cycle of the hero, or the hero's journey. And curiously enough, there are 17 stages in that hero's journey, and there's 5 that are represented by the cosmic gonic cycle, which is the boon that the hero receives. And then there's also a cycle of the heroine, which is, to me, even more interesting. And there's some major differences between them. I highly recommend, if need be, because it's another Crosscrow book, I'm pretty sure that Kristen can probably get you a copy of that for free. Because, you're in the business of, looking at books and.
I buy books. I
Yeah.
like to keep, I like to give money to writers.
Yeah. But anyway, so, go ahead and get a hold of that book, because you and I might have some stuff to talk about. But if you are exposed to the deity periodically and psychically, it's going to basically have a powerful change in you. Ultimately, you will achieve at one-ment with that deity, and that to me is pure enlightenment. It doesn't make a person's life easy. In fact, it makes it much more difficult. But you have that connection so that the deity literally is standing at your shoulder.
I laughed because my tantric teacher says this. She teaches we take in various deities and bring them out from us. It's an interesting process. And she says, people enter into this and they say they don't understand how difficult a path it can be. They say, well, this will lead you to bliss. And she goes, eventually, but you have a lot of work to do first.
It will lead you to moments of bliss. It will also lead you to moments of darkness and despair. Because we are not on a monastic path per se, we will not have to endure the constant cyclic process of the dark night of the soul, mainly because pagans do not have a barrier between themselves and deity. If you are a monk, following, one of the guidelines and pathways associated with a monastic, rule, there is a distinction, a barrier between yourself and God. And even the intermediary or the demon of Yahweh and Jesus is also remote. And perhaps, if you are very fortunate or very lucky, or maybe the deity feels really sorry for you, you might be granted moments of bliss. But for pagans, this barrier doesn't exist. And so because of that, we do have access, and it is something that we can bring into our life. And so we can avoid having to endure the terror and the horror of the dark night of the soul.
It's a really important point, an interesting point. I hadn't thought about the sort of Christian connection there, but yeah, it's not something. Dark Night of the Soul is not something that I've heard pagans talk about, and I think it's really an intelligent way of looking at it. That we always have the deity. We always know. We know I am goddess, right? So we always have that understanding.
But we know it intimately.
Yeah.
In order to achieve an intimate encounter with the deity, it's perceived as being rare, because there's that inexplicable, divide between divinity and humanity. And that's something that was very much part of the Christian perspective. And that's the big change that changed religion in the West. And I'm pretty sure that the Neoplatonists did not see reality that way at all. Even though a number of my friends blame Neoplatonism for the excesses of Christianity, I don't think that is really the case. I think that Christianity borrowed things from Neoplatonism that it liked, and the rest of the stuff they kept, hidden away, or they didn't talk about it. I mean, considering the fact that we didn't have, during the Middle Ages, we really didn't have a lot of Plato's dialogues. We didn't have the Hermetic documents. We were missing an awful lot of written material that was something that they would have had.
And the practices, I mean, you've put your finger exactly on it, that the difference is that Neoplatonists worked directly with deity and did ritual. And those were the exact practices that were suppressed by the Christian church. Deity is definitely separate, and you are not that. So I think it's a really good call out.
Yeah, in the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, the ceremonial magician operated under a concept that uh, human beings were powerless. We had no power. We had no ability to change anything. We were just victimized by fate. And the only way that you could get out of that rut would be if you gained an angelic or demonic ally. In other words, some kind of familiar spirit or intermediary between you and and the various deities and forces that are out there. I mean, the curious thing is that um, the religion of witchcraft in the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance and all that, based upon the interrogation materials that we have for witches who were basically caught and condemned to death. They were much more focused on the magic
Mhm.
and a lot less focused on religious aspects. In fact, they were almost kind of apostate, irreligious sort of individuals who are more interested in manipulating, what was available to them in order to eke out something a little extra for them and their family. And if you consider that mindset was very much a part of the monotheistic Christian perspective, then we basically blew all of that up in the 50s and mostly in the 60s. In the 60s, we basically just blew all that up. We basically rejected that. And that's because we were getting a lot of influence from systems of philosophy and religious philosophy associated with Hinduism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people started to question, okay, why can't I talk to God? I
Yeah.
mean,
And something I love about your book too is that you talk about the practice, the theurgic practice of animating statues. So you can take
uh,
deity and put deity in yourself. You can take deity and put deity in someone else. But you can also take deity and put deity into statues. And
yes,
in the tantric practices that I have taken up, that's a very common thing. We take a statue, we put deity in the statue, and then this is interesting. In the Hindu practice, you take the deity back out. In fact, we just finished a big celebration all around India, Durga Puja.
yes,
And I've been just immersed in. I went to Kolkata in 2019 to experience Durga Puja. So cutting to the chase, there are images of deity, and they take all year to build them, install them in elaborate shrines. I mean, shrines that are 4 or 5 stories tall that take all year to build. They do rituals for 5 days, and then they take that statue and they put it into the river. It's made of clay, so it goes and dissolves into the river. So that whole it's all ephemeral, which is
yes,
just amazing. And it corresponds with the manifestation of Durga out of the water and out of the earth, and then she becomes real and people can relate to her, and then she merges back into the earth, into the water. So there's a sense that there's a cyclicness to it. And
yeah,
yeah, and so I think this is really wonderful, and not too many people. This is what fell out also of pagan practice. Christians really hated the statues and broke them, so we're just starting to rebuild that. So I love that you talked about it in the book, and I'd like you to talk a little bit more about your practice with statues.
well, the really big problem is that it's something that was known and discussed and talked about, but nobody wrote down how to do it back in antiquity. In the late antiquity, it was a thing. In some cases, it was fraudulent because, there was someone behind the statue, like a puppet manipulating it and all that and having it talk. But in other cases, there were statues that were imbued with with the deity. Now, but we don't know how that was actually done. So, being the nuts and bolts magician that I am, I came to the conclusion that if I create a talismanic field, and this goes into talismanic magic, and the talismanic field is always a planet and an element mixed together. In that matrix, you have 28 possibilities. They also match up more or less with the 28 mansions of the moon. So what you can do is that you can generate a talismanic field and then project that into the statue so that it has a perpetual energy field, and then draw down the deity into that statue. And the statue now has an energized core. It has an intelligence that is, close to it, or in some fashion. You would pick a talismanic field that would represent the personality or personality aspect of the deity that you're going to work with, so that there's a harmonious connection. But what I discovered when I did that, I had no idea what the heck I was doing back in those days. I mean, this was a pure experimentation. Oh, I figured out how to do all this talismanic work. I know, let's put a talismanic energy field in a statue, and then I'll call down one of my private deities into that statue, and lo and behold, it became enlivened. Now I would, feed it sacrament and all that stuff, but because there's a talismanic field associated with it, it's there forever. I can literally give what statues I've animated to other people, or will them if I die, and they will continue to operate forever until somebody completely destroys the statue.
I think that that's original to you. I think that I haven't heard that from anyone else. I know lots of ways to animate statues from the Western tradition and from the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, but I haven't heard anyone build a field like that. And that's amazing. I don't remember if you went into detail in this book. Is that a book that you need to write? Like, here's the 28 fields
I wrote it. It's already in print.
Yeah. What's the book?
It's called Talismanic Magic for Witches.
Okay.
It's part of the Four Witches series.
Great. Yeah.
It's number 3. It's the one just prior to the green book you've got in your hands. This one is kind of turquoise, not turquoise. It's kind of sapphire colored.
Let's talk about the series then, because this is the 5th in or 4th or 5th in the series. So what are the other books in the series, and talk about the sort of the story arc of the series itself?
Well, the very first book that I wrote, this is really funny. I was at Paganicon, and Alicia Gallo used to sort of flip through there and all that, and I had managed to get a book published by them called it's called Magical Kabbalah for Beginners, and it's not for beginners. And some of the people who read it like, this is not a book for beginners. And it's like, I know. How can you have a book for beginners unless that's actually really useful, unless it's Kabbalah for dummies or something like that, that is so rudimentary it's useless to anybody except for someone who knows nothing about the subject.
Yeah.
So they had that book in there, and a couple of occult authors said to me, well, Brian, what you need to do is once they got that into their sweaty hands, you need to come around and give them another book to publish, because they'll be looking for that. And so I said, yeah, I asked Elisa Gallo, and I said, if I wrote a book on spirit conjuring for witches, would you publish it? And she's like, oh yeah, that's perfect. So I took my decades of materials and dusted it off and all that stuff from the ESSG and other sources. But I wrote this thing with a pure perspective of, of witchcraft. So there's no Kabbalah in it at all. In fact, all 5 of these books have absolutely no Kabbalah in them whatsoever. It's pure witchcraft. The closest I get to it is the second book in the series. I needed a system of numerology, so I took that from the Pythagorean system. But anyway, so Spirit Conjuring for Witches was the first one that came out of the box. And that's a nice, book. It's kind of, it's in black, it's onyx and colored, so it's got an onyx cover. The next one that I wrote it's called Elemental Powers for Witches. This works with the energy model of magic. And so there's a lot of stuff in there working with elementals, and then with another energy system that I call, which is the qualified energies, and that's the 40 energies associated with, the Kabbalistic Sephira and the 4 elements or 4 worlds. But I didn't use any Kabbalah, so I'd use Pythagorean, the number symbology from 1 through 10 in order to get away with that. So then the third book is Talismanic Magic for Witches. The fourth book is Sacramental Theurgy for Witches, and the 5th one is Transformational Initiation for Witches, or Transformative Initiation for Witches. And then I wrote another book, a little itsy bitsy book, which is called Mastering the Art of Witchcraft. And it basically teaches you how to go from coven-based or solitary-based magic to preparing you to be able to work with these 5 books that are more advanced. So
Great.
that's an entire series, and I'm very pleased and proud of it. The deity statue animation was actually supposed to be part of the talismanic magic for witches, and it got booted out. About I would say 4 or 5 chapters got ripped out. Llewellyn didn't want them in there, so it ended up in the next book. I found a way because it's theurgy, so by golly, and it fits with the title, so there it went. But it's using talismanic magic to create the talismanic field that feeds and energizes the deity that gets encapsulated into it.
And it seems like, so I'm looking at your forthcoming titles, and it seems that now that you've written this set of books for witches, you're looking more at ritual magic. So you have 2 books: Disciples Guide to Ritual Magic and Mastering the Art of Ritual Magic, and then Liber Nephilim, which I know you wanted to talk about.
The other 2 that you talked about, I wrote those. Those are the very first 2 books I've wrote. They're being republished. We went through massively and edited them. If I have to read those books again, I think I'll probably scream, because I must have read them I don't know how many times to get all the editing, everything in it just so. But yeah, Liber Nephilim is out. There's another book that is called the Abramelin Lunar Ordeal. That is the lunar ordeal version of the Abramelin working. I have another one which is called the magical. Was it the art? Was it the magical art of? It's the magical notary art, and it's all about sigil magic of every kind, including the noti associated with the grimoires of the Renaissance. And then the one I'm working on right now is Liber Artis Archaeomancy. It's this magical system of archaeomancy, which is a comprehensive book on angel magic of every single type of angel to invoke using the archetypal gate ritual, which I wrote and developed many years ago. And there's another part in there for entering into the Kabbalistic dimensions. Those are those triangular shapes. If you take the tree of life and you remove the Sephira, there's all these triangle shapes, except right above the abyss, there's 2 trapezoids. And those are the 18 dimensions. And of course, the angles, angular vectors, those are the aethers. And instead of 30 of them, there are 56 of them.
Oh my,
And
it sounds like a
and there's an entire system of Kabbalah associated with this. But I'm only able to present a small amount of it because there's so much more that needs to be done, research and everything else to bring all this stuff together. But it's a Enochian system of Kabbalah.
keep writing for sure. So do you make public appearances? Let's talk about how people can connect with your work. So you have your books. How else can people get in contact with you?
Well, I have a blog that has 500 articles in it. I've got I do go to conventions. I've been to Pantheacon and Paganicon. I will be attending was it Convocation in Lansing, Michigan this year. My wife is working in another town, and so my ability to travel and all that is not really that going to be that good for the next year or so. But I will be in New Orleans to have a book signing for Liber Nephilim, and that will be the 7th through the 10th of November. So I'm getting on a plane, and I'm not going to know who's going to be president just yet. It's going to be really
You'll be holding your breath.
Yeah.
So what's the name of your blog?
It's fraterbarrabbas.blogspot.com.
Okay. All right, we'll ship it to you, Hercules. If you are inspired, you could put it in the link to the recording. And is there so you have like 1 minute? Is there anything else that you want to make sure that people know about how to contact you or your work?
They can contact me through Facebook, Frater Barrabbas. They can contact me, through email. They can contact me through the ESSG website that's out there. I have an author website called fraterbarrabbas.com. So there's a number of ways of getting in touch with me, or you can just basically send an email to my publishers, and they'll probably forward that to me. I get a lot of crazy email from people asking me to do miraculous things to help them and all that kind of stuff. But occasionally I get somebody who actually has something really interesting to say. Plus, I've got a bunch of authors to whom, like yourself, I kibitz with every now and then.
Thank you so much for spending the time with us, and it's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you for a very awesome and very deep and interesting conversation. You gave me a lot to contemplate. And there were many points, as Brandy can probably surmise, where I wanted to jump in so badly. So this will be up by tomorrow afternoon, and I will send you the link. And if you send me an email where you'd like me to put links to, I will add those tomorrow when I publish the show.
Okay. Yeah, I will do that tomorrow morning. Tonight, though, I'm just gonna take it easy and all of that.
Sunday night. It's Sunday night. Thank you for spending your Sunday night with us.
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions about anything? If you wait just a second, Brandy, if you've got just
don't go away. We're wrapping up, Frater Barrabbas.
I know
we'll have you back.
Okay, no, but I just wanted to go grab the 5 books to show you what they look like.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. You were going to give us the 1 minute, Hercules. Yeah, you should definitely have him back. There are many things to pick up. Yeah.
Taylor Elwood, I'm rereading his stuff now. I've talked to Taylor Elwood a few years, the pop culture magic series.
Right, yeah.
It's like stuff that I intuitively was doing all along.
This is the intro book that I didn't want to write.
Okay.
I understand.
And then the very first one in the series is this one right here.
Ah, okay. Spirit Hunting for Witches. Okay.
Then the next one is this one.
Oh. Okay. Nice covers.
And then the next one is this one. There's your talismanic magic.
Talismanic Magic for Witches. Yep.
And then there's this one that you know.
Yeah. That we've been flashing. Yes.
And then there's this one.
Ah, so it's out. Excellent. Marvelous. And they look, even though you've changed publishers sort of in the middle, they look like a series, which is very nice. It's great of Cross Crow to kind of keep that theme going.
I made sure that they did. In fact, the type setting and everything is the same. You would think that it's a Llewellyn book, but it really isn't.
Mm.
Well, thank you very much. I will close now. Thanks to our wonderful audience for tuning in. And I look forward to everybody's feedback. Thanks again.